to sharpen our sensitivities and understanding, to temper our spiritual lives, so that they may become channels of his mercy to others and to bear fruit for his kingdom. But these disciplines must be seized upon, not thwarted. They must not be seen as excuses for living in the shadow or living half-lives, but as messengers, however painful, to bring our souls into vital contact with the living God, that our lives may be filled to overflowing with himself in ways that may perhaps be impossible to those who know less of life's darkness. And to me, what that quote is saying is use that to bring you closer to God. Don't look at it as something as an evil thing, but look at it as something that God's using in your life, essentially. So, and I do challenge you that if you are, or if you know anyone that is experiencing loneliness and they're communicating that to you, hear them, honor them, validate them. Don't try to fix it for them, okay? Instead say, I am here for you. I will do anything. But if you think someone's loneliness has tipped into depression, right, that suggestion towards some mental health support might be impactful if the relationship bears it, because sometimes depression begets more loneliness, which begets more depression, and then it gets super hard to kind of pull that back in. And honestly, even just talking to a friend about it helps lift some of the burden. Does that make sense? So does anybody have any questions for me about loneliness or treating it, or? Yes.
I tend to think of it, I read it recently, that just getting out of the house and seeing green grass and trees and things.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we have a dog. You need a dog.
Yes.
You have to go out and walk your dog. And you see every time you go out, you see certain, couple neighbors or something, or just somebody going by in the car and you're waving. And I just think that's important.
Yeah, it's so sweet that you mentioned that. I thought about giving some suggestions for things that could help, but the issue with that is I don't necessarily know what would bring you joy necessarily. Like, people keep telling my mom, for instance, that she needs to get a dog. No, she doesn't. She hates pets. She doesn't need to get a dog. Do you know what I'm saying? So I always don't always know what the right. Do I give tips? Do I not give tips? Because you need to go for a walk, call a friend. There's lots of things. And if I'm with you, to me, getting outside, if y'all been to the new Memorial Park, have y'all been there yet? The whole, it's so pretty now. And the Eastern Glades, oh my gosh. To me, that's an antidepressant, right? But not to everybody. Some people like to go sit in a dark movie. They like to go to the movies. I think it's really about saying, okay, what I'm doing isn't working. So I need to figure out what it is that I need to do that's going to improve it. And so walking your dog, it's amazing. Yes, I walk my dog every single day, So I agree with you. Yes, it's a good suggestion. Anybody else have any questions? Yes?
Yeah. So I'm a widow, and experiencing the loneliness of losing a spouse when I was 58 years old was really hard.
Yes.
And there's a lot of loneliness with that. And things are a little easier now. It's been almost 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you say, or how do you work through when you're grieving the loneliness? I mean, like every single day at 5 o'clock, I knew dinner would be coming, and I didn't want to cook it, and my husband always cooks, and so that was a really hard time of the day for me. So, I made through it one step at a time, but it'd be nice to know what you can comment on that.
Well, I'm so sorry. That's just not what you would expect at 58 years old, right? Is to lose your husband. So your path got super altered. The path that you were thinking, you know what I mean? In y'all's mind, you're probably 10 years out of retirement and maybe raised kids. You know what I mean? Just ready to oddly kind of start living your life, right? And I think there are those, the grief alone in that is palpable, right? You feel it, you can touch it, it's significant. And there are times of day, there are things, obviously, it's interesting you use that 5 p.m., that dinner time example, because that's, again, when you found your fellowship with him, right? That's when you connected with him. Maybe y'all came home from work and you guys sat down and had food together and all that connection. And it's like, I think a lot of people could say to you, well, call a friend, go do this, go do that. And what my experience, yeah, I know, see?
No, I'm gonna sit there and cry.
Yeah. That's why I'm reluctant to give like examples, because like from my experience, I don't know that I would want to call a friend and talk to them instead of my husband. You know what I'm saying? I don't know that would be helpful. Like, and sometimes I think you just said it. You do just need to cry. And I don't think there's one thing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, my opinion is as you feel it, you experience it. And then it's almost like if you think about the waves in the ocean, they come and they go. But if you hold them all back, it becomes a tsunami. And then you get flooded. You can't handle it, right? So I think for you to cry and experience that and take your time and only do what you know that you need. I mean, honestly, because again, people have great advice.
Oh,
Yeah.
Tell me what to do. And I don't want to hear it. They told me how to grieve, or you grieve too long. I'm like, leave me alone.
Said no one who's ever experienced grief, right? Anyone that says that probably has never experienced grief. I hate that expression. And grief is like, it's funny. There's the 5 stages of grief. We all know them: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, right? And you think you finally get to acceptance and you're like, oh, I've made it. Bull.
Oh, no.
No way. You go right back to denial again. And it's this like terrible jumping around process, right? And I don't think you ever get over losing your husband like that. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is, like I mentioned earlier, not the why, but the what. Like, what does God have in store for me? What do I want in my future? What do I want to do? How do I, because you're not going to ever fill the void of him, and you can't even try, right? It's impossible to try. But what I would say is, and it's been 10 years, but you'll never fill his place. That's not the point. But the loneliness piece that I think maybe you've experienced, especially in the first couple of years, right? What I would just ask you to think about, like, what is it that you want for your future? What do you want in your life? What brings you joy and connectedness? Kind of like she mentioned earlier about like being outside, walking her dog. I mean, what are the things that bring you connectedness? And like, does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
I don't even know that I'm even answering your question, but I don't think we can grieve too long. And I don't think anyone that's ever said that has ever been through something like this, right? I do think connections with people, you're here. I mean, you've got this beautiful group. I mean, and I'm sure I would think that you have connections in your life. And one thing I would maybe tell your friends is, I am kind of lonely at 5. I mean, I would encourage you to be vulnerable. And maybe you are. So you shared here, which is cool. But I would encourage you to be real, be vulnerable. Because I think a lot of times people, they don't know what to say. You know what I mean? Like, I think people don't know what to say. I know. Does that make sense?
Don't forget, we live in Texas, and we have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps.
Yeah, definitely.
And we are independent people, and we certainly don't want to lean on anybody else.
I know.
And I would be damned if I'm going to call somebody at 5 o'clock and say I'm lonely.
I know.
I just won't do it.
Well, and maybe that's not the time to do it.
Well, I know.
You know what I'm saying? But yes, but I do agree with you. It's so annoying. I mean, I remember trouncing to my parents, telling them that I had an eating disorder, and I'm the child of an immigrant, by the way, so my dad was weird in a way that was super fun, but he just didn't treat things the way most parents treated things. But, oh my gosh, my parents said to me this, are you ready? I weighed like nothing, and I was super sick, and my mom and my dad sat me down and said, no, we don't have mental illness in our family. You can't have this.
Okay.
The solution? Eat more. Eat more. But you can't, you guys. When you have anorexia, you can't. It's nuts. But you can't. So I literally, I'm such a smart aleck. I've been that way my whole life. I go, well, was I adopted? Because I have this. I mean, but they couldn't take it. You know? No. It's kind of a family joke. But, you know, again, maybe it's not that you tell somebody at 5 when you're super vulnerable, but maybe you plan activities that are blessings for you. Like, do you like to paint? Do you like to garden? Do you like to go to the movies? You know what I mean? Kind of create your own, like, joy, so to speak. I think it's a miss to think you're going to fill his space, because you won't, but you'll find other things that add to, if that makes sense, you know? I don't know. And there's also always other places that you can work to give back to, like with grief. I think Bo's Place is always looking for help. I don't know if that's something that would interest you, but there's, all kinds of other things that you could do. My thing is, it would be the what for you. That makes sense? Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, got one here. Do you mind? We'll come to you next. Okay, go ahead.
What is the difference between just being lonely and being lonely for something or someone?
Well, it's a good question. So what would be like, does it be someone lonely for someone that's passed or that's not near you, or someone that like from your history, or is it someone like current, like you're lonely to see your daughter?
Well, for me, it was being lonely for myself.
Oh.
My husband and I taught school in Turkey for 5 years, and then we came back and we were in Minnesota, and at that time I became a professional musician in a church. And we moved down here a couple years later, and after about 6 months here, I thought, there isn't any me here. I'm Margaret Tucker, the minister's wife.
Wow.
I'm not, my husband was a minister here. And I tend to solve my own problems. And so after this went on a while, I talked with my husband and I said, I need to do something where nobody knows who I am. And I need to find that identity again.
Wow.
So I went back to school out of the University of Houston where nobody knew me. And I found myself again.
I love that.
And I was lucky. I got to be the minister of music here for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
But I was lonely for myself.
Wow. They're showing me your book. Well, that's so like insightful and so self-aware. I can't even take it. Like, it's so good. I mean, because you recognized, like, I'm not meeting my own needs. And that's sort of along the theme of what I'm talking about. It's like helping people figure out, what do you need? Not what do I think you need, right? I'm so impressed. I mean, are you still a part of the music ministry here?
No, I'm retired.
Okay.
I'm retired now, but I do composing. So
Oh, okay,
I'm
just
still
composing.
music.
Okay. And do you still find that you're seeking for yourself?
No, that was.
You're content?
Yes.
Yes, that's so cool. Thank you for sharing. That's so cool. That's a great example though, right?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a question?
Related to what Mary mentioned about the rugged individualism, I was wondering if you are aware of, do Americans have a higher rate of loneliness because we are sort of schooled culturally to do it ourselves? Or do you think does that have any correlation?
What a heck of a question. I don't know, actually. That's a good question. In sort of researching, what I kept looking for was Americans and the world and similarities, right? And the theme that I kept getting was, you're not alone if you're lonely, the world is lonely. So I think sadly that everyone feels so connected to everybody, yet there aren't any real connections anymore that are happening. There are, I take that back, that's a generalization. But there aren't as many, right? Which is why I said, like, the holidays this time, people are frantically trying to get all the connections, right? And make all those things happen. So I don't know. I mean, I do think in America we have a drive of like achievement, work, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, figure it out, And I also think we're one of the worst cultures in asking for help when we need it. You know what I mean? I just don't think we're oriented that way. And I also think that we orient our men to not feel, but to just get it together and not have emotion. There's things that I think we do that are misses that I'm hoping we're seeing a trend in a different direction. I do not know. My family is in Holland. That's where my dad is born and raised. And they're some of the loneliest people I know. So, I know COVID's been tough in Europe, right? But Holland in particular, they've socialized medicine. They don't have access to vaccines like we did. So they're all getting vaccinated, but they're terrified and they're isolating. So I don't know if it's just a COVID symptom or if that's how it's been. I hadn't paid attention to it before, but I have been. So I don't know. It's something I got to go research now. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to add, I'm thinking about cultures where multi-generations live together.
Yeah.
For example, in America, we put a lot of old people in homes or assisted living or whatever, and we don't live together. So, or they're senior citizens, a lot of them live alone, or, so we don't have a sense of community. We're in our individual homes.
Yeah.
And it's not like some cultures where grandma and grandchildren and aunts and uncles and everybody lives together. So I'm just wondering, it would be interesting to know the relationship between cultures that are very family oriented and all live together and like America.
Well, it's interesting. It's why Italy got so clipped by COVID, because they have multi-generational people living in homes, right? Not, very much unlike us, right? And so you had like exposure on generational levels, and it just hit the elderly generations much more so than here, where, like you said, we all live by ourselves. I mean, Chinese culture, Hispanic culture, there's a lot of generational living, and I do wonder, is that, I actually think if you live in America and you have that, it's weird for you. But if you don't, and you live like in China or Mexico or Italy, it's not. Does that make sense? Like, if you're a 17-year-old and your grandma lives with you, and you have friends over, you're like, this is kind of weird, my grandma lives with me, but all of us that get to go to that person's house that's grandma lives there thinks it's awesome because your grandma lives with you. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I mean, it's a good point. Is that less lonely? I mean, I hear a lot of like I have several senior patients, and I get one of them. He's so mad because his kids keep wanting him to move to a home. And he doesn't need to be in a home. He's doing amazing, actually. Like, he's running circles around all of us. But they want him in a home. And I'm like, why do they want you in a home? He's a widower. Widower? That's a male? Yeah, widower, yeah. He's a widower. And he's like, well, they think I'd be better off, and what if I fall, and all this stuff. And I'm like, you do you right now. He's social, more social than I am, this dude is. I mean, so there isn't necessarily a one-stop solution, right? But like, I think it just depends on family to family, but that is an interesting point. Yes?
What do you recommend for a teenage group, that is having so many problems with loneliness now?
Ask it again?
I said, what are you recommending for the teenage group that are having so many problems, like you said, with going back to school and their friends, and that age level is really high in suicides and things?
It's so high. I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's up like 66%. I think that's the number. Teen suicides are up 66%. It's such a good question. Also, thank you for asking, because if y'all aren't aware, it's the hardest hit right now. They're the hardest hit. And I actually, from my perspective, it's funny, as a mom, I guess it's because I'm a therapist, I never cared about my kids' like grades. I didn't care. I mean, I wanted them to not slack off and not be irresponsible, but I didn't care what you got as long as you did your best and you put most of yourself into it. But I think it's like we have to pull the pressure back and say, we're going to meet you where you are right now. We don't care. Like, there's a ton of kids right now that aren't going to school. I don't know if y'all realize this. They can't. They feel so behind that then they're not able to even start because they don't know how to catch up. Those are the ones I'm most worried about, of two that I'm seeing right now. And they've just not gone and not gone and not gone. And the other thing to think about too is, like, yes, last year they went to school, but you had half the school online, half the school in person. There was tons of cheating. I'm not judging. I mean, but there's tons of like, give me the answers, give me this, I'll turn it in. They're just almost path of least resistance in a way, which I don't blame them, because have y'all spent any time on Zoom? It's awful. And these guys are like 40 hours a week on Zoom, right? And especially, like, think about it. Back to last March, they went home for spring break, never came back, okay? So now what's happened this year, if anybody's in education, please do something about this. What's happened this year is they are like, nope, they haven't learned anything, we're cracking down. So it's like extra hard this year. It's exponentially harder. I can't believe it. There's no grace, there's no nothing. And then these kids start to fall behind and they become despondent. So my thing is, I don't care about your grades. Do your best, right? Acknowledge, like if you know any teen that's really struggling, acknowledge that, and also remind them that none of it matters at the end of the day. They will graduate high school, right? These high schools are in the business of graduating kids. They'll work with them. They can do all these different things. They really are. They want you to do well, actually. People don't think that, but they do. The third thing is, if there is depression going on and that kind of sense of hopelessness, please refer them to a counselor. Please. Just refer them to a counselor, because just putting a kid in our office and then the kid starts talking about it, everything changes. The cloud lifts, you know what I mean? Like, I've got a couple kids that come to my office and do their homework in my admin space because they're just, they feel like it's like an added, like, accountability. I'll walk by and I'll be like, so what are you doing in there? Homework, you know what I mean? If you've gotten behind, don't be afraid to be creative. Don't be afraid to do homeschool, offer tutoring. There's tons of different things that we can do. The other thing that they're doing too much is they're doing too much screen time, and it's linked to depression. It 100% is. And it's also hurting their eyes. I don't know if y'all realize this, but they're all going to end up having eye issues down the road. But I personally, as a mom, I would limit screen time for sure. It sounds punishing, but they thank you later. Like, did anyone go to camp, or anyone's kids go to camp? My kids they went to Laity Lodge, and they loved it so much because they didn't have their phones. For 2 weeks, they don't have their phones. I mean, it was a break, right? So things like that. But if there is anybody that is in your life that is struggling and you recognize it, don't be afraid to talk about it with them too. See, I see it in you. I see you. You know what I mean? I see you struggling. How could I be there for you, right? And I think we're sometimes afraid to say that to people because we don't want to offend them. Don't be, right? Don't be afraid, especially if you're not judgmental, which I can't imagine that anybody would be necessarily. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but the struggle is real right now with our kids. I'm super worried about them, actually. Yes.
This is particularly pertinent to me today.
She smiles with her eyes, by the way, when she talks.
I had an opportunity today to go and tour KIPP Academy
Oh, nice.
West.
Yeah.
And they have a program or a curriculum of social emotional learning.
Yeah, every school
And the kids meet every day at the beginning of the day before they open math books or social study books or science books from primary school through high school on the different campuses. And they meet in group form with the teacher
That's amazing.
that's designated for their group. And they talk about how they're feeling. And they talk about how the challenges of bullying we were able to observe a couple of the groups this morning, and they address those issues, but the kids are the ones that are being given an opportunity to share how they're feeling, and all of their feelings are acknowledged, and the teacher inserts when it's appropriate, but steps back long enough to let the kids focus on one another's feelings and how they're interacting with each other. And the comment that was made by the person who was leading our group was that there is no way we can teach kids math and science and history if we're not acknowledging their emotional well-being.
No
Because
way.
If your head is focused on the fact you don't have food, if your head is focused on the fact that there's violence in your home, if your head's focused on the fact that you don't have a home to go to, how on earth can you learn math or science or English?
It's so true. I know. That's such a good point. I'm so glad you got to go see that this morning. I wish that, is KIPP, it's not public, right? It's funded.
It's a charter school.
Right. School, we're getting better about like encouraging vulnerability and kind of some realness, you know what I mean? I'm sure y'all read the news about the Astroworld tragedy, and the Memorial High School child, like they had a service for him on Sunday night, like that they pulled together purely because of social media. I mean, so we're doing more of, I think, that, and the other thing that I think is neat, I think y'all should be encouraged by, is kids now are like proud to go to therapy. So they talk about their therapist. It's funny when they all find out I'm their therapist and they're all friends. They're like, you see her too? You know what I mean? But they'll all come in and go, you see so-and-so. And I'm like, I can't say what I can't say. And you never told me. And I'm like, I cannot comment. But it's so funny. I got a call from a little bitty voice the other day on my cell phone. And she was like, Mrs. Cook, hi, my name is whatever. And you see my friend so-and-so, and I'd like to make an appointment with you. Will you call me back? Here's my cell phone. Little tiny voice. So I call her back, and I'm like, hi, this is Mrs. Cook, this is Melissa. And she said, I want to make an appointment. And I'm like, how old are you? Like, this is what I want to ask her, but I don't want to because I don't want her to think I'm, like, jumping down her throat. And I go, oh, my goodness gracious. I'm so impressed that you called me. Like, you called a therapist by yourself. Like, and she goes, well, I mean, can I make an appointment? And I said, I think we need to get your mom on the phone to schedule that because your mom has to fill out some forms. And then she said, I'm kind of afraid to tell her. And I said, well, why don't you walk the phone over to her right now and put her on the phone for me? And I was like, your kid called me. Don't freak out. You know, she wants an appointment. Don't freak out. And the mom was like super proud of the kid, who ended up being 10. 10. Hi. It was so precious. But I think that's more common. So I think they're really realizing, like, I think this generation of kids will change the world in terms of acceptance of mental illness and reaching out, getting help for it. And hopefully we'll see that in more schools. It's a great point. Yes. Y'all have asked some amazing questions. What a great audience. So thanks for having me today. I really appreciate it. If there's no more questions, I know they're going to lunch at Jonathan's. Get the campechana. It's amazing. Like if you like seafood tower thing with corn chips, so good. It's like the favorite thing on the menu. Yes. All right, thanks you guys. You're welcome.
Sean, do you have any directions for us?
Well, here you go. I'm afraid our reservation is not until 12:30, so you don't need to rush over there. Take your time and chit-chat, but I'm not sure how much good our reservation will do anyway because we had such an enthusiastic response. So I hope they will welcome all of us, and that's all I can say. You'll order, I believe, from a special menu. I think we will order from a special menu just designed for us, I believe. And that's all I can tell you. You will place your own order, and you will be responsible for paying the restaurant yourself. And I hope that you will all enjoy it.
Directions again?
The directions, I think the easiest way for me is to go out on the parking lot and turn left on Beinhorn, and then at that traffic light, turn left on Voss, go under the I-10 and turn left on the access road, and you don't go very far, and you'll find it on Campbell on your right.
Right before Campbell on Peter.
Okay, I haven't been there.
So like if you're on the freeway going towards, like, if you're going west on the freeway, so it's like it's between Voss and Campbell. If you hit Campbell, you passed it. So right before the light, look to your right, it's right there. So it's yum.
Is it on the freeway Feeder Road?
Yeah, Peter, yes, yes.